Welcome to J11's second class on relationships, which is part of his series on life mastery basics. In the first relationship class, Jay discussed the agreements partners should come to before making a commitment. In this second class, Jay reviews the requirements and skills needed for a healthy relationship after a commitment.
So welcome back. We're entering class 8, which is devoted to this second class on relationships, to be followed by 3 classes on human communications, improving human communication so you improve all relatingness. So for the first thing we want to do is I want to review the history of human relations a bit, as we've discussed in earlier classes, and just give you a brief thumbnail so to position your sense of what's happening in the world and what's happening to you when you're having this experience. So if you remember back to the orientation class, one of the points I made was that we developed in hierarchical structures, we developed a very different kind of human relationship other than being in circle as equals to each other's, where we felt free to express our knowingness, our ideas, where there was a limitation on judgmentality and people were able to be in an evaluative mode rather than a judgmental mode. And hierarchical societies, as they developed throughout history, have limited that. You've often paid price for being your true self or expressing your truths. Remember, Galileo had to retract just to save his life. His idea that the earth moved around the sun and not vice versa. And in human relationships, all kinds of wisdom teachings, including Jesus's 2 wisdom teachings, that we've had to retract because they don't fit the top to bottom paradigm of how you're supposed to behave in a culture that's actually working on a hierarchical basis to serve people at the top with more advantages, more privileges, and then people lower down. More power, certainly. So just to reveal, again, the process here, when in hierarchical societies, anybody had to suppress themselves. It led to vast courtroom intrigues, lots of rebellion, and basically people having to come home with the anger and the suppression and lack of understanding of what was happening to them and take it out on their families, try to model the king role at the family level rather than honor the women's role. And what happened was we get dysfunctionality and abuse passed down from family to family, generation to generation. And those patterns that we develop in childhood of coping mechanisms, defensive mechanisms, mind talk all the time, trying to figure it out, come right into our relationships. And they play out as the toxic side of our relationships and the dysfunctions we have. So part of the solution, as I've been arguing and showing, is you really got to know your own patterns. Each one of us should know what patterns we're carrying into a relationship as a very meaningful exercise, because if we're not going to take responsibility for our patterns and be conscious of them, they're just going to keep running us rather than us healing them and opening up to our authentic selves coming forward, our true spirits coming forward, and making a great dance and great deep experience. Not traumatized experience, not drama experience, but a deep, phenomenal, wonderful growth experience of relationship. So we, if you remember in class 2, we took a look at childhood patterns that you still got. And today I want you to just focus first to start off with making a list of the patterns that you see yourself that work for you in relationship and don't work for you in relationship. So think about what you bring into a relationship that comes from fight or flight and that acts out patterns you've had from childhood. You try to take care of the other person. You run away and avoid the other person. You suppress your feelings. You belittle the other person with your feelings. Whatever it is. You get scared easily. You manipulate. You hide your stuff. You don't speak really truthfully. Whatever you think of as your patterns that don't work in a relationship, make a list of those. I want you to be very aware of them. And then next, make a list of those things you think you bring to relationships that are healthy, that you, in fact, know are coming from a strong place inside yourself and are working both for you and within the relationship. It's important to be mindful of the healthy things you're doing and to acknowledge those for yourself. And it's just as important to specify the patterns that are not serving you, because they then become the focus of what you want to heal. What you want to acknowledge, take responsibility for, and heal. Get out of the way, get out of your way, get out of your relationship way, etc.
Please take some time now to make your list of patterns. When you resume listening, Jay will be discussing sharing the details with your partner.
So in the last class, I mentioned that the sharing of patterns with your partner, taking them through the exercise that you did in class 2 of your childhood patterns, and sharing them with your partner. And now I want you to encourage you to do the same with this list, to have your partner make a similar list. And for you to sit down and discuss these lists and have a conversation about how they seem to play out day in and day out. Give yourself really a couple of hours and use the exercise here that's very healthy in relationships. If you're finding you're getting stuck or going into any kind of blame, just give yourself a break and have the listening experience be a listening experience followed by a response experience. So what that means is if you're not flowing easily, you just make an agreement, an open agreement, a contract, that one of you will share their thoughts first and the other person will take it in and acknowledge what they heard, and, literally say, I get that you're saying this, and you believe this, and you believe this, and then they give their response. And try to stay out of attack, making the other person wrong. Just an understanding of they've got this pattern, you've got this pattern, and you're in the early education stage of acknowledging and seeing the patterns, and then discussing how those patterns might affect each of you. And as the last stage of the exercise, what agreements, open agreements you might have, be able to come to about handling those patterns consciously. How you might do something differently collectively, share it doing something differently in relationship to those patterns. So you notice from this that this is not what you regard as normal relatingness. This is not normal relationship. This is something where you're making more of an effort in a specific way that is quite easy to go into avoidance on rather than green light because it's uncomfortable, it's not new, this is not the way, why isn't it easy? The lazy, damaged part of us doesn't want to be vulnerable. And if that's your state of mind, then it's for certain there's not going to be any change. If you're going to stay in resistance to the idea that learning to be in relationship is a skill set that you were not taught and that you're in school now and that you're just a student and your partner is just a student and students make mistakes, they add 2 and 2 is 5. As I said in an earlier class, when I asked a student to give me a lecture on advanced nuclear physics and they couldn't do it, and I said it's hard to give an understanding, a lecture on advanced human relationship and the human psychological development. It's a more complex course. In this case, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. But the fundamental idea here is that you're a student. This is what you are. It's not that you've got it all figured out or relationships have to go. Throw out all that garbage. Relationship has to be this way, that way, et cetera, et cetera. You don't know relationships could be if you don't have a successful one already. If you're looking for a successful relationship, you better know that you got to learn different skill set and different tools, and that's what you're getting here. And you've got to act on those tools, just like you don't go into advanced algebra using simple multiplication table. It's just the basics of it. And it's more complicated because what you learned as a child about emotional relationships very often is 7 times 7 is 53, not 49. So we've got even that complication. So just be patient, be a student, be a happy student, have fun with this stuff.
Jay now outlines and discusses the crucial principles involved in having a conscious relationship. This is one where the partner is aware of their needs and their partner's needs while learning the skills to create a deepening connection with their partner rather than a disconnection.
So with that, I want to segue into some more of the work from our book of the month, Conscious Loving, The Journey to Co-Commitment. And I'm going to be, of course, as before, mixing my own thoughts and concepts with some of theirs. But again, this is this is the primer I like on human relationships, and I think they've done an extremely good job. And I'm happy to have known them and happy to be able to share with you the good work that they've done in this teaching, even as, I may have massaged it here and there, amplified it here and there, added my own techniques and thoughts and practices here. So in the last class, we focused on what they call step 1, and I'm going to have a 7-step process. And step 1 was the 6 commitment agreements, the breakdown of the 6 agreements. So I'm going to go through the other 6 steps, and then we'll come back to some of my own material. So step 2 for them has a beautiful sounding word that every one of us says, well, how do I do that? And that's called learning to love yourself. The reason they have it as step 2 and why it's so fundamental is because we are so engaged in finding fault with ourselves most of the time rather than finding appreciation for ourselves, that we almost don't acknowledge the idea that what we're doing right. And as they put it, why do we not love ourselves? There are several prominent reasons. The first being that until recently it was thought to be sinful to appreciate yourself. If you are not actively obsessing on your weaker points and berating yourself for your imperfections, you are simply not taking advantage of the opportunity. Now, however, we define self-hate as neurotic, part of the problem, but it was not long ago that it was considered the royal road to self-improvement. If you applied enough self-loathing, you might motivate yourself to do better. So we dealt with that whole paradigm in the course on clearing our minds and dealing with our inner critics. And to bring it to bear in the relationship issues, if you're in a place where you're always on your own case, then you're in trouble. You're always going to be, in such circumstance, craving the support of the other person, feeling not adequate, wondering, very dependent on the other person's opinions and good feelings towards you and judgments of you, very sensitive to anything that resembles them pulling back or critique of you. And we've all had that experience, and we get triggered into, great amounts of obsessiveness, some of us do, and craziness and madness and compulsiveness when we feel we're losing the approval of somebody who we're dependent on for that approval because we haven't given it to ourselves. So as the Kendricks point out, a lot of this comes from the fact that in our childhood, love was very conditional. I love you, you're a good boy, if you do this, we'll love you if you succeed this way, etc. So I want to read something from the Hendricks that'll be helpful here. True self-love is not conceit. Conceit is trying to prove to yourself and the world that you are all right after you have become mired in self-hate. True self-love is an ongoing celebration of who you are, no matter how well you perform. It is an ability to greet the dark parts of yourself with the same gracious embrace as you greet the light. Love draws no distinction. It is. Love exists outside the normal constraints of time and space. That is why love can heal something in the second that has been bothering you for a decade. If you are angry or afraid, for example, and have never loved yourself for feeling that way, one moment of loving yourself for having those feelings can set you free. Not long ago, we worked with a man who said he had not cried in many years. He talked about his hardness and rigidity and how it had kept him from experiencing love. We asked him where he felt most rigid in his body. He tapped his chest. Catherine placed her hand on his chest. "Have you ever just loved yourself for being hard?" she said. He shook his head. "Then let's do it together," she said. He burst into tears and continued to cry for 20 minutes while we invited him to feel his sadness and to breathe with it. So, what's going on here? What's actually going on is that we are so in denial, so many of us on so many levels, of pushing away any part of ourselves we don't like about ourselves, to reveal it, to share it, etc., unless we're just walking around telling people why we hate ourselves. But mostly we tend to push it away. And at the same time, we're buying into it. We're buying into this, and we're not owning it. So the idea that you could actually love the part of you that's damaged is like the same concept that came up when we saw that little boy and that little girl in that second class exercise, right? And the feelings you had towards that being. That little being is lovable with its flaws, and maybe even be more lovable with its flaws, its confusion, its fears. To turn on yourself for having them is to turn your traumatized self on the traumatized self. So you're just magnifying the issue. So a great exercise in modern human development is to identify those parts of yourself you're in shadow on, that you have judgment on, and say to yourself, I love myself even with this attribute, and I can even love this attribute about me because it's there to be my defense mechanism. It's there to help me in a certain way. I don't have to use it anymore, but I don't have to be on my case about it. I just understand it, shift my attitude towards it. So learning to love means being able to see that the complexity of you, the beauty of you, the gifts you bring into the world, all these things do have these childhood flaws, childhood mistakes you made, and, make jokes about the places you're hurting or acting out. Turn it into, a sweet affection for the fact that you're got this idiosyncrasy where you want to attack yourself, and okay, I get it. Because just in doing that is going to bring down the level of pain. So we've already had 2 classes in which we identified our gold, right? Where we think about ourselves as gold. So the classes were when we saw the child and made the list of the child's good qualities, and in the class on the mind talk, where we had people in the room here and you at home ask other people to identify your good qualities for you, or you wrote down your own good qualities. So another exercise for doing this, giving yourself some interesting distance on the process of feeling self-love, is to put yourself in a place where you put up a picture of somebody who's not you, maybe looks a little bit like you, or somebody you know, or somebody you don't know, and you do an exercise where you look at the qualities of that person, and you read, say, this person has these qualities, right? And you read off your own good qualities. And you say, this person also has this trauma behavior, and you read off your own trauma behavior. So you're looking at from a depth and you say, well, would I love this person less if they had this trauma behavior? Would I appreciate or respect this person with all these wonderful qualities and gifts just because they had this trauma behavior? And in doing it to them, it becomes easier for you to do it to yourself. So you get off your own case and you come into a place where, in fact, you look at yourself with a little bit more equanimity and a little bit less of the critic judging you, and you've got the other tools we taught on dealing with the critic. And, when things are really bad, you can gremlinize them. So, questions?
My question is, how do you love the hurt or the harshness that comes out in yourself? How do you love the damage?
Okay, aside from the tips I've already given you, a good exercise is to give yourself the right to express the pain and the damage. So if you've been holding it back and you've been suppressing it, and you've got anger at yourself and you haven't vented it into a pillow, you haven't given yourself a chance of releasing it. If you've got grief about yourself and you haven't expressed that, you haven't given yourself a chance to get on the other side of it and see yourself as somebody who's got these feelings, but the feelings are not them. They're just feelings that have moved through you. And you can't, until you have that experience and give yourself the gift of that experience, you're not going to know the power of it. The Hendricks have an interesting example just about that. They talk about a client, a courageous woman, age 27, illustrated the principles that you can find love at the bottom of everything. Her symptoms were overwhelming sleepiness and boredom, both of which were interfering with her work. She had recently gone to work for a new boss who seemed to trigger the feeling. She explored the specific sensations of the boredom and sleepiness and found that the underlying emotions were anger and fear. "Who does your boss remind you of?" we asked. "My brother," she screamed. As the catharsis unfolded, she relieved her sexual abuse at the hands of her brother. Over the next few sessions, she contacted all the old deep rage, powerlessness, and fear of being 12 years old again. But she did not stop there. As she opened up her deepest feelings, she found a new love for herself and for all of her feelings. She had not been able to love herself because she was stuck in the surface feelings of boredom and sleepiness. And then more emerged. She began to feel spontaneous waves of forgiveness for her brother. We encouraged her to share her rage and fear and forgiveness with her brother by letter and phone, and she followed through on it. Her courage forced him to look at the way he had treated all the women in his life. He experienced growth in this area, and our client developed a new and healthy relationship with him. So the basic rule is we don't know our true selves and our true spirits and the loveliness that we bring forward and the lack of criticism, which automatically spells a decent loveling for ourselves that comes forward when we get to the bottom of these feelings that we suppress and hold on to, particularly the ones about ourselves, as if my hatred for myself is really authentic and really based in some substantial reality, simply because I made these mistakes over and over again because I was maleducated. So there's, in essence, the first coming out of the mindset and just accepting your core basic innocence and the mistakes you made, and then getting past the feelings, as well as those other exercises I've talked about. So if you're doing your journals about when you're having successes, just acknowledging your successes day in and day out builds a track of interesting loving yourself. I did good today, right? About this issue. It's not ego, it's not conceit, it's a sense of giving yourself a different experience for a while, till as long as you need it, till it's like embedded in you. And that's the matrix that you're living in rather than the matrix of finding self-fault.
In this coming section, Jay discusses the crucial need for knowing and allowing for feelings and emotions in a healthy relationship, which for many of us is a necessary skill to be learned.
So what's step 3 then? Step 3 is an immense one, and we're going to do a lot of work on step 3 when we do the communication classes. But step 3 is learning to feel. It's learning to know your feelings and to be able to safely express your feelings. They make a note there's a delicate balance between repressing your feelings and that letting them overflow is in this narrow zone that psychological health resides. If you shut your feelings out of your awareness, you deaden yourself. If you let your feelings spill over inappropriately, you'll risk censure and worse. It is now considered necessary to bring our feelings out of the shadows and into the light. Hidden feelings have been implicated in nearly every human ill, from headache to cancer to heart disease. In our therapy practice, we've come to see that the act of hiding feelings is perhaps the most crippling component of relationship difficulty, but it's just as important to learn when and where to express your feelings in ways that will be well received. So we're going to learn a lot about how to express our feelings in the classes coming up. But let me make this point again that I made in an earlier class, which is we are very ill-educated to our feelings. Our feelings are often dealt with as abstract concepts, right? I feel taken advantage of. I feel abandoned. Those are concepts, right? They're descriptions of a situation, right? Rather than I feel frustrated, angry, and somewhat scared even that you're trying to take advantage of me because I believe you're trying to take advantage of me, right? I feel really scared when I'm alone. I feel really deeply frightened. I feel really deeply frightened when I perceive somebody as abandoning me and pulling away from me. I really go into this sense of panic hits me, right? We don't automatically go to this place of sharing feelings and knowing what the feelings are, or even learning what our core feelings are. So what happens is we suppress them, we blame other people, we go into concept phrases where we expect the other person to meet us. And what's happening is the person is not being denied the ability to hear what we're feeling and to resonate with us on a more feeling level. So just be aware of how you may have responded to me differently before when I was expressing the feelings in the situation versus the concept of the situation. So here you are in relationship and you want to be relating, and we're feeling beings. We have a huge range of emotions. And to not share that range of emotions with your partner is to put yourself both in prisons, and to not share it in a safety zone where it's allowable for everybody to feel whatever they're feeling, because some of that feeling is going to come from the traumatized self. And if the other partner recognizes coming from the traumatized self, they don't have to take it personally, right? They don't have to think you're pushing them away or attacking them. And you want to create the context in the relationship for that to be the case. So in dealing with feelings, it's also important to know that not every feeling you feel has to be expressed just for the sake of expressing it, unless you want to blow it off in a safe way. You don't want to enter a place where just because you've got a feeling you need to lash out at your partner with it because you're in the early days of learning to express your feelings. You can have a feeling without acting on it, and that's what rage management teaches. And you can have a feeling of despair. You can have a feeling of terrible anxiety where you're trying to grab people and pull them towards you and hang on in some part of the relationship. And, all these unpleasant, terrible feelings can come up. And the more you do the work that I taught in the emotional mastery class, rather than act on the feelings, the better you are. Because you don't want to make yourself compulsive in a relationship. You don't want to let the fear drive you. You want to manage the fear. Because the fear in acting on it and trying to control a situation or manipulate a situation is for sure going to undermine the relationship, because that's what happens in relationships that are not based on trust. You're going to trigger the other person's intimacy issues, their upper limits, and they're going to pull back, not be there for you in the most meaningful way. So If you're already in a relationship that's not grounded in friendship and allyship, you've got it even more incumbent on you to learn to manage your feelings and not act on them and move through them in a safe way so you don't destroy the potential for turning your relationship into something healthy.
Jay now continues to detail 2 more requirements for a healthy relationship, including the necessity of each partner to take 100% responsibility for what is happening. This is a new and healthy way of thinking, embracing the need for partners to speak the, quote, microscopic truth to each other.
So step 4 in their 7-step process is they call it claiming creativity. And claiming creativity we've already touched on with the last class, and that really means the idea of taking 100% responsibility. If you're in a relationship, you're there because you've chosen to be in it. You may say, why did I ever choose it? How did I get here? But you're there because, honey, you chose to be there. That's why you're there, right? So that's your first responsibility. Your next responsibility is, what are you going to bring to that relationship? Are you going to bring all your patterns and codepend and go into either blame or manipulation or trying to appease the other person's patterns? Or are each of you going to say, I'm responsible for what I bring in, you're responsible for what you bring in, to collectively we're 100% each co-creating the situation. So let's not get out of the blame game of you stop and I'll stop, but let's each just agree, I'm going to work on my stuff. I'll work on identifying my patterns that are not serving, you work on yours, and let's stop projecting. A great spoken contract is not to stop projecting on each other. So as they write, projection is the act of denying that you are creating the experience you are having. Instead of acknowledging that you are the source, you get caught up in who did it to you. The projection comes in several forms. The most common is seeing in someone else a feeling that is actually going on in you. You fail to acknowledge an absurd and general sexual feelings in yourself, then suddenly notice that your partner has a wandering eye. You fail to make moves towards freedom, then become obsessed with how much your partner limits your freedom. Another form of projection is to attribute to an external source something that is actually an internal process. He made me furious, we may say, when in reality, I'm furious is the truth of the matter. Even if you can get 24 friends to agree that he really did make you furious, what is the payoff? Happiness is projected onto external sources, as the advertising industry figured out a long time ago. A friend of ours put it well. I thought I would be happy if I lost 20 pounds and had a better job. So I lost 20 pounds and got my dream job. Guess what? I still wasn't happy. Then the reason the person wasn't happy is because they hadn't healed all the other stuff inside themselves that we've been talking about in these classes. What's the way out of projection? As they teach and I teach, you've got to take responsibility. You've got to be aware of, and we'll get into this much more deeply in the next class on communications. You've got to be aware much more deeply of the difference between your judgment and where the other person has actually come from, and your failure to actually explore with them because you don't have a contract to be fully open and fully transparent. You're failing in that co-commitment. And so what happens is you're going to get trapped in thinking where the person's at, imagining things about them, projecting on them, rather than saying, wait a minute, I'm going to take co-responsibility that's my thoughts and my ideas, and I need to check them out. And I need to check them out with my partner and make sure they're not a projection and learn where I'm coming from. The alternative is you quickly descend into fault-finding, and they make a point that sometimes one person is clear and the other person is entangled in the game. And in such cases, because even one person is clear and holding the space and not buying into the codependent blame game and taking responsibility there, that an issue will resolve itself. But in the cases where both parties are playing the same game and you really haven't opened up dialogue and really aren't being transparent, you and aren't really claiming co-creation like it's your fault some way you think it's the other person's rather than you've got your stuff and they've got theirs, then you're going to end up cycling down into this bad stuff that's not serving your relationship. They make a point, if you want to have competition in your co-committed relationship, why not compete who can take responsibility fastest? So that's a nice game to play. All right, I'm going to take responsibility for this. So what I'd like you to do is, right now, make a list. Think of your core relationship or the last one you were in, if you're not one now, all the areas you did not take responsibility for, right? and or not taking responsibility for now. And make that list, because we want to bring it forward so that you can actually begin to own it and start taking responsibility. So make that list. And in making the list, avoid codependence. In other words, don't take responsibility for the other person's stuff, just that you're with the other person. So, good. Now you've got your list done. I want to spend one more moment on this codependent matter because it's so crucial in relationships. It's very common, and if you do this, put a big star next to your list of what you need to take responsibility for. It's very common for one person to think they're putting more into a relationship than the other person, and that the other person isn't really stepping up. And instead of calling on the other person to take responsibility, and this happens in the workplace in particular often, you'll say, oh, I'll just work harder at it. I'll make it happen. I'll make it happen, right? Whether it's the workplace or you need to take responsibility for co-creating that situation. And your job and your task is to require of the other person that they step forward as part of the agreement to have a healthy relationship and that they take responsibility for what they're not doing. If as an employee, you've got to say, I need you to take responsibility for this, not overwork for them, not cover for them. If it's your mate, that's the same thing. You're required to step up, have the courage to step up. Otherwise, the only thing you can really take responsibility for is you co-create a codependent situation that isn't working for you. And you've got 100% responsibility for that because you're not requiring the other person to take 100% responsibility. So, moving along, we go to step 5, which is learning to tell the microscopic truth. So the microscopic truth means, some people think, it means if this is the timing, no matter what, I've got to say, I just saw that woman and I got hot for that, looking at that woman. And then I went and had it, or the microscopic truth is I had an affair, etc., this day and this day. So learning to live in complete honesty is extraordinarily important. And learning to create a space where you can be fully honest with each other is beyond belief important, because a major pathway to your true self is being honest about everything. In this case, however, they also mean being microscopically true about your feelings. They're not referring to just the general openness and honesty that a relationship should have, and sometimes you've got to pace the timing of when you say things. They're talking about something much more specific, which brings everybody immediately into the moment. And that's being able to identify exactly what you are feeling and experience in the moment. And they make the point, withholding the truth is a form of lying. It leaves us in a state of suspension. Physically, the act of withholding can show up in several ways. So see if any of these following nonverbal symptoms are familiar. You get a tight throat, you clench your jaw, you get a headache at your temples, you get shallow breath, tension areas between the shoulder blades and the forearms, you have fluttering sensation in your stomach, and you go into evasive eye control. So when we're doing that, we're in a form of avoidance. We're in a form of shutting down. And shutting down means you're shutting down the ability to relate and deal with the other person from your true self to their true self. And as they point out, we have a lot to learn about telling the truth. Why? Well, picture yourself saying in a very matter-of-fact voice the following things to your mother and father. I'm a deeply sexual being. I have a lot of sadness and anger in me. Sometimes I hurt a lot. Could you have done that at the age of 13? Could you do it now? If so, you are lucky and have a rare relationship. We use this example because most of us learn to lie in our relationships with our parents. We learn early on that certain things, if said, cause us great inconvenience. We get censured, laughed at, or beaten up. We take a mental snapshot. Truth equal pain. Pretty soon it doesn't even consciously occur to us to tell the whole truth. If you escape childhood with an easy ability to tell the truth, you are blessed and in the minority, in the distinct minority actually. Most of us carry into our adult relationships a reluctance to telling the whole truth. It takes a great deal of loving work on ourselves to become free and easy with the truth. So how can you know what is true? Our definition, the truth is that which absolutely cannot be argued about. For example, take the statement, John is a jerk. It is clearly not true because at least John would probably argue about it. In any case, it could be argued about and therefore is not true. If you say, I'm angry at John, that is much more likely to be true. Even closer to truth, I'm scared of that part of me that John represents. It'd be hard to argue about it because only you could possibly know whether you are angry or scared. If what you say gets an argument response, use this as a signal that you need to go to a deeper level of your truth. Following are some examples. I'm scared. I'm hurt. My shoulders are feeling tight as you talk. I have a pain in my chest right now. When you told me about the other woman, I felt a wave of nausea and I'm still feeling it. I talked to my ex-wife today. So microscopic truth means being aware microscopically of what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and being willing to share it. To say in the moment, this is what's happening to me. And then to put behind that, and then to replace that with something that's unarguable. To have a statement that's unarguable. So again, statements that are unarguable: I'm sad, I didn't tell you earlier, I'm afraid you'll leave me, I'm more vulnerable with you than I've ever been before in my life, and this brings up more fear that something will go wrong. I have an expectation if I tell you the truth, you'll push me away. As I say that, I have a memory of my father pushing me away. So we fear the consequences because of the childhood experience, but in fact, when we enter this frame of being really concretely honest, we're actually so appealing to the other person's humanity. We're so calling forth that like space inside themselves. We're so giving them permission to go to the same place that unless they're phenomenally damaged, you're going to get a positive response from this. And you may not get it on the first breath, you may get it on the second breath, but if you're patient and watch the other person process the information, it's very likely you'll get it on the third take with the person. So it's a different paradigm. You're entering a different paradigm for this.
Coming up next, Jay will be discussing why it is essential in relationships to keep agreements if in fact you want a relationship to be successful, and also what it means to keep positive energy going between partners even while basic fears of intimacy are rising up to disrupt the relationship.
The sixth step is keeping your agreements, an invaluable exercise. Relationships sink or swim often on the ability to keep agreements. It's a major sense of where you build trust and allyship, even down to I agree to take out the garbage every time, I agree to do this, I agree to that. And when you don't keep agreements, it's essential that you acknowledge very rapidly you didn't keep the agreements and not try to hide out and not try to excuse it. So, and why is this important? Because look at who you are as a person. You're a person who came into the world wanting to feel in a trusting place and wanting to feel safe, and you found that it's a great place of judgmentality and a place of attack, place of conditionalized love, conditionalized communication, conditionalized allowance for expression of feeling. And in that world and in that matrix, the idea that anybody is going to keep an agreement that honors you, that puts your reality, sees you clearly and agrees with you and supports you, makes that agreement really important to themselves, rather than making whatever they're feeling in the moment, whatever trauma they're managing in the moment, whatever their willfulness is in that moment, their priority is a rare experience, right? And so when we don't keep agreements in relationship, it just triggers that whole matrix. It triggers back to that childhood. It's why couples react and overreact to feelings when agreements have not been kept. And why a fast way to lose faith in a partner is for them to not keep their agreements, even the simplest ones, or for you to not keep your agreements. And the Hendricks make this nice, sweet point. The mark of evolution is how you react when confronted with having broken agreement. The more evolved you are, the more quickly you will simply acknowledge it. At more primitive stages of evolution, you will tend to justify, change the subject, get angry, or use some other ploy, Oh, you're always picking on me. So what if I missed it for one time? So what if I didn't take the garbage out one time? What's the point of, give me some break here, et cetera, et cetera. These maneuvers never work because only when you acknowledge a broken agreement can you begin to find out why you broke it. The person who is committed to aliveness will always be scrupulous about keeping agreements. So they make the other point that for many people, breaking agreements is a way of communicating hidden anger. If you hold on to anger at someone, your unconscious mind will cause you to forget to keep your agreement with that person, or to subvert it, actually. Barry had a reputation for showing up late for meetings with colleagues, his wife, and others. When confronted with this behavior, he frequently reacted with anger and justification. Finally, he saw that he seldom arrived late if the activity was something he wanted to do. It became clear that he had a habit of making agreements he did not want to make, feeling angry about it, stifling the anger, then breaking the agreement as a way of discharging the anger. Then he could righteously defend his position, taking the attention away from the fact that he had broken the agreement. So you have to ask yourself what games like this you play about your own feelings because you feel it's not safe to be really honest in the beginning about what your desires are, what your wants are, where you're coming from, and take responsibility for those functions in your relationship as well as take responsibility for where you're not stepping up. So step 7, they call learning to live in a state of continuous positive energy. And they point out childhood is full of events like the following. We are trying out something new and we hurt ourselves doing it. We are playing doctor and get caught with much subsequent uproar. We are playing happily when suddenly we get punished for something we did yesterday. We are excited about some upcoming event and some authority figure says, don't count your chickens before they hatch. We build up a program in our mind from experiences like this that says, don't let yourself feel too good. If you feel good, something bad is likely to happen. Better keep the brakes on even while your foot is on the accelerator. So the element that comes into play here is what they call the element of upper limits and what I call the fear of intimacy and happiness because it's going to take you back to the original shock of childhood. So in our neural net, we build up this ability to sabotage ourselves or to pull back on experiences, and we do it pretty constantly.
Jay now answers a number of highly relevant questions from students that may mirror your own questions.
I have a question, Jay. So does the undermining of a relationship happen when one person is trusting and going in with full friendship and working on the relationship for many years as friends, and then they live together and the other person either lies by omission or just out and outright lies and plays games by not stating all the other person's activities? And does that ultimately end the relationship? Especially if the other person is always finding fault and calling the other individual, whether it's the male or the female, it doesn't matter, but if the other one's always lying, the other person's always catching the other person in the lie, and then always having to go through this drama.
It's a reality, right? When one person's doing a fair amount of work towards making the relationship meaningful and another person's not there, right? There's 3 potential outcomes, basic outcomes. One is they go on in that pattern for the rest of their lives, and both parties are completely frustrated. And, I would say certainly in the old days before divorce, that was a habituated pattern in human relationships. You just, stuck your head down, grinded it out, went through it over and over again, dealt as best you could, but basically it was an unsatisfying relationship, which is, having many of us seen such unsatisfying relationships, we decided we're going to up the divorce rate. We're not going to be there. And we weren't learning the skills being raised in relationships like that to know how to get out of them. We didn't have the modeling. So that's one aspect. The other potential is that the party who is more advanced says, I want a new contract around this relationship, right? I want a deeper level of understanding here. I want agreements on a range of things. I want us to examine behavior. I actually want to move this into a more conscious place. So whether we have to go to coaching to do that, whatever, but here's my new boundaries. Here's my deep understanding. This is the kind of relationship I want to manage. This is where I need you to step up. And I'm going to hold a space for you to step up and make it not critical of you. I'm not going to attack you for being in this other place. I'm just going to invite you to understand that this is not satisfactory for me, and I can't believe it's satisfactory for you. And so we got to learn our way to better way and get out of this fault-finding game. So that's another potential. Third potential is, of course, you say all this or you hold this thought and the other person's nowhere near there and you say, okay, I'm gone. I'm finished. This relationship has to end because it's not a relationship. It's a codependent set of maneuvers from my stand self to your stand self. I don't want to be in this.
And if they have small children involved?
Then they have small children involved. So, raising children in dysfunctional family lives does not help the children.
I understand
Right.
that.
So that's the projection of fear, the projection that leads to dysfunctional relationships being perpetuated. Rather than claiming your power, standing in it cleanly, without attacking, and knowing that the only healing of the world and the healing of the people around you comes from stepping out of your own traumatized stance patterns and your own idealized self and operating from that reactivity. There's nothing gained in it. The only thing that happens when you codepend with another person is you keep them in their state of weakness. And what is that state of weakness? It's their illusion because they didn't have enough experience in their childhood of who they really are. It's their illusion that they're weak, that they're threatened, that they're fallible, that they're wrong, etc. All the garbage of the traumatized self, and without the opportunity to move that away, heal it, and get to know their own strength. Get to know the spirit that lies underneath it. So the idea that you let an addict fall to the floor because they've got to have a complete breakdown of everything before they can rebuild themselves comes out of that premise. It's a tough love premise, but it's really not tough love. It's really respect for the other person's, for the fact that the other person didn't create itself and is dying, desperate to have the relationship of its true self, and you are an enemy of that true self by cohabiting in that dysfunctional relationship. You are actually keeping the person in their prison. You are not liberating them because by not liberating yourself, you're keeping that person in a prison that they need to find their way out of to discover what their own true strength is.
So if one person's admitting that they're weak and that they have these faults and they lie and they have been dishonest
Right.
and everything, and the other person's saying that they're strong and they're whatever, and they have the delusion, at least one or the other, but usually the strong person believes that they can help the weak person and that the weak person will make them softer because they're too hard.
So who's the weak person in this case?
Soft male, the Robert Bly male.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think Robert would take some exception.
Yeah, he might take that, yes.
He might say owning my own feelings and not being in that masculine stance, that posture, right? But owning the full range of my feelings, including my pain, right?
But shutting down is not good.
It is actually allowing myself a pathway to my own true power in the world.
Yeah, but
right?
when you shut down emotionally, when the person who's supposedly stronger, the female maybe, is stronger and believes that it's their way or the highway, basically.
The female
Saying to the male, and the female saying that she's strong and she's and she's hard and tough, and he's weak and soft.
He's more scared than she is.
And he's probably scared to death that he's going to get
He is scared to death.
beaten up.
He's scared. He's scared to death that his whole self-image is going to truly collapse on him, and he'll find himself lonely and abandoned, and not knowing how to deal with those feelings.
Right.
Which is, again, I go into more detail on that in the class on what women need to know about men. But in reference to your question, though, the answer here is, if the strength is coming from a truly loving place, like I am going to support you if you enter this with me, if you enter this set of agreements with me, if you do this work, right, I'm going to be your ally in this. And I see your fear, and I recognize it, and it's not the end of the world for me, right? You'll make it the end of the world for you. And I'm saying to you, I'll support you as you enter the fact that you've got a traumatized self, and it's time to learn mechanisms that you didn't learn as a child, just to get an adult education about it, right? And it's not even therapy. It's just having an adult education to manage what you're feeling, to manage your behavior patterns, so it all works for you. And I can be your best friend in that and partner.
Yeah. And then if a woman and a man are in a relationship, long-term relationship of 14, 15 years, and the woman finds out the man is cheating,
Right.
and she doesn't leave, whose responsibility is it? Is it hers or his?
Well, it's both your responsibilities.
Both are
I mean, she's responsibility for being in the relationship in the first place, and
Right.
she's responsible for not leaving. We're responsible for the choices we make. And if we make those choices by giving authority to our traumatized self, as most of us do until we start waking up, and the traumatized self is making the decision, nevertheless, there's always some sense within ourselves that maybe there was another alternative, but I was too fearful to give it that way. So you're always making the choice. And the question for this entire course is who's going to make, which of you, like I say, keep it simple, which you is going to make the decision about anything that's coming up, your knowing self or your traumatized self. So, you're talking also about relationships that were unconscious to begin with.
Right.
That started out unconscious.
Both of them.
Right.
The two different
They probably started out as sexual affairs, and went into then the patterns I talked about in the earlier class, on first class on relationships, about what happens when you get into a sexual relationship, and you don't have the tools to deal with all the shadow stuff that's going to come up, and every bit of everybody's fear, hate, anger, toxicity is going to come up in the relationship and come up pretty quickly. And then you're going to try to figure out how to get through it using fight or flight skills from childhood. That's not a relationship, right? That's an agreement, an unspoken agreement to keep flaying each other with your traumatized selves. A relationship is learning the skills of relatingness that are not taught in the mass culture. That this class is trying to teach, and lots of people are trying to teach. It's a skill set, and so all these questions get answered differently. Your perspective on all these answers, rather, is answered differently from you if you begin with the idea that relationships are allies, friendship, etc., and mutual opportunities to heal the stuff between us, and each of us arrive in our own enlightened state. Used right, it's the fast path to enlightenment, which is something we discover that we are as we heal the trauma and get the blocking traumas out of the way. It's the true self that we don't have to create. The kingdom within, as I've said. Make sense?
That makes total sense.
You, okay?
I have one question. So, Jay, my question is, I've noticed personally that when I broke up several times with partnerships, the partners were still in the same circles, like the same dance circles, the same school circles, and I always felt awkward, like I'm not sure how to be in the situation with them, and just the feelings within me have been very awkward. So even though I did share microscopic truth and talk pretty thoroughly and deeply about what was happening, what ends up is that I feel uncomfortable then with the presence, and I engage much less within the group. So I'm wondering if you could address that.
Mm-hmm. So what my sense of these is that they're probably relationships you entered from the sexual romantic point of view to start with. And therefore they weren't grounded in friendship. They weren't grounded in trust. They weren't grounded, you didn't even begin to reach the state of allyship, right? So naturally you're going to feel awkward because you don't know what ground you're on. Who's this person? Who am I, this person? Now we shift the context of our relationship. But what's our relationship anyway? It was just like me using him and him using me for our indulgence of getting something for me, getting this good hit for myself, feeling great, having my sexual rocks off, having somebody I could relate to for 5 minutes in some positive way. But it wasn't grounded in anything deeper than that. It wasn't grounded in the familiarity of trust, knowingness of each other, true caring for each other, times when you've had opportunities to display and be in that true caring for each other, times of stress, times of support, times of real outreach and support, the kind you'd want to give anybody you loved and cared about. So inevitably you're going to feel awkward. And the only thing to do about feeling the awkward is process the feeling of awkwardness and, see if there's potential there to build friendship, not necessarily build with a romantic intention, but there's potential to have a conversation, say, what does it take to us to shift to friendship now? What would you feel comfortable with? Here's what I feel comfortable with. I don't want to feel awkward here. Is there a way do we have enough mutuality of interest that we can go off and say, well, let's just do this. Let's hang out around these things from time to time. And if it's a thing where the guy is still after you sexually or interested in you and you can't go there and he's not open to that, then you just have to accept that you co-created the situation by entering the relationship from the beginning as a sexual romantic relationship rather than really building foundation. Make sense?
Yes.
Answer the question?
Well, yes. So basically it's just understand and acknowledge the feelings and...
Yeah, and idea is to see how far you can go with each person that you're feeling awkward with in terms of transforming it by using the tools of, open communication, sharing, and just, creating a space and inviting a person to meet you in a certain space. And if they can, they can. If they can't, okay. You bless them, and maybe a year from now they'll meet you at that space, right?
Can you address my feeling of not wanting to interact with the social circles as much just because their presence is there?
None of us want to feel awkward, right? None of us want to feel like less than. So the way to deal with that is, on the emotional level, use the emotional mastery tools, process the emotions. What if you do a heart math around that for a day or two? Or, and then look at the deeper issues involved there. What are you protecting? Are you protecting you or are you protecting the other person? What's the awkwardness about? So if you're protecting the other person, right, then you're in, the standard codependent mind. I don't want this person to feel bad. They can't,
I'm protecting me.
Okay. So if you're protecting you from feeling awkward and feeling, then and you still want to be in those circles. So you've got, go back and listen. If you haven't got it the first time, go back and listen to the tapes of the class and really practice the things you're learning to deal with those feelings, those gremlins, and identify any gremlins behind it. What's the thought form behind it that you're buying into? Some thought form you're not good enough, or you screwed up some way, so you created this awkward situation for yourself. I don't know. What is it? Do you have an idea what it is?
This happened twice in circles where there's circles. Mm-hmm. And then
so
I have to kind of what I chose to do was disengage and be scared and not interact with the rest of the people. So I kind of shut myself down.
You went to flight.
I went to flight. Absolutely, I went to flight.
So again, by the time you finish this course, right, not only if you're doing it right, not only you've identified all the areas you go into flight and have it in your notebook. I'm not going to go into flight now. What am I doing? But by the time you finish the communications part of the course, you'll be able to have some tools to step forward and talk to them in a different manner. So you'll have more confidence in addressing the issue.
This concludes Jay Levin's 2 classes on relationships. They are part of Jay Levin's full 12-part Life Mastery course, which covers emotional and mind mastery, including the internal critic and replacing it with a strong and confident positive self-image. The Life Mastery course also covers financial mastery, learning how to access your deep knowingness and intuition rather than being led by your chattering mind, and teaches skills in communicating with others that will give you great confidence you can handle just about any situation. Separately, we encourage women to check out Jay's course on what women need to know about men, and we invite men to check out his course on what men need to know about women. Both are superb complements to the relationship class you have just listened to. And if you are interested in an appointment with Jay, you can email him at jlevincoaching@gmail.com or contact him directly at jlevin.com. That said, we wish you the best. The following are testimonials from 3 women students who completed Jay's 2-class course on what women need to know about men, which is available on this website.
I think the class, what women need to know about men, is an extremely valuable class because, again, we've all had relationships with various partners probably throughout our lives, but this is really an opportunity to assess sort of what our history has been and move forward into more empowering relationships. So I think it really forces us to have immense honesty with our patterns, our unhealed patterns, ones that we've dealt with in others, and what we're willing to commit to. So I think it's really providing a very healthy, solid framework and foundation for moving forward to our ultimate relationship that's really going to grow us into our fullest potential with another human being. So it's great. I love it. It's just like nonviolent communication, very, very powerful course.
So I came a little late into the class for what women should know about men. I've had a lot of experience with men, so most of my relationships had traumatized men in them, as well as myself being the traumatized woman. Not being in a relationship now for 4 years has helped me come to the point that taking this class, I really understood what mistakes I've made and kept repeating patterns of picking the same type of traumatized man on different levels. So between different age groups and different nationalities, it didn't matter. It was the same trauma. So I'm hopeful that anyone who takes this, who really wants to get to know themselves and how they relate to men, that they'll learn to see the signs of not communicating, of withdrawing, being passive-aggressive, demanding that the woman do things the woman doesn't want to do necessarily, being very macho. So that was something that this really helped me. Jay is really, really good and very clear in speaking the truth of his experience of counseling many women as well as his past relationships. So I highly recommend this for any woman who wants to really get down to the basics of how to relate not only to themselves, as in the Life Mastery course, but also how to relate to men.
I found this course to be extremely valuable. It allowed me a deeper reflection of my past, how I created life and partnerships, and it allows me to see things differently so that I may move forward with different choices. In the past, I've noticed personally that I left just about every relationship I was in. And mostly it's because I noticed some kind of a pattern, or I didn't know how to be more empowered in what I did want to manifest in their relationship. And so I inevitably would leave it. And after going through this class, I feel confident that I have more tools and skills and understanding and approaching a relationship with, okay, there's patterns for you and there's patterns for me, and that is normal and that is acceptable. So a greater degree of acceptance and probably a greater degree of maturity in saying, I understand this is how it works. This is what's happening for me. This is what's happening for you. Let's figure out what we're doing together and how we move forward given that this is who we are. So I don't need perfection. I think after this course, I need the understanding of, okay, this is doable and we can move forward and I think we can create it. So I find this course invaluable to me personally. I would recommend every woman that has been in and out of relationships to take this course and get a better handle on what we are doing and what is to be accepted and how to go through the difficulties or the things that we're having a problem accepting in the other partner. Really extraordinary insight.
The following are testimonials from 2 men students who completed Jay's 2-class course on what men need to know about women, which is available on this website.
Experiencing this class on learning more about women, I'm seeing more of myself as well as I learn more about women, is I have more clarity in the aspect of patterns that I've developed, and I'm very fortunate that I've been working on those already. But this class has outlined other aspects that I hadn't quite focused on as clearly as this makes me do. And it makes me very excited because I'm currently in a relationship that's intimate, but I also consider my friends, my female friends, as family. And that's an intimate relationship to me right there. So this is all important, and I will carry this in through the rest of my days.
So sitting through the What Men Need to Know About Women class was very interesting for me. I've never done anything like this before, therapy or group classes, nothing like this. So it seemed like a lot was coming at me, like I was getting bombarded with all these subconscious things that I was aware of but never actually expressed with other people. I feel like everyone's aware of these things, but to talk about it really brings it out. And I learned a little more about myself, and not being in a relationship right now, I think it gave me a good roadmap for the next one that might come up.